Thanks for having me. It's great to be back. I was here kind of between 2012 and 2017 as when I graduated my master's, but met my husband at the College of Architecture and Planning. He was here for another year, and then his sister also went through the College of Architecture and Planning, and she just graduated a year or two ago, so still have been able to visit and come back and see what good work everybody is doing here. And like Nate said, I'm from Indianapolis, grew up there on the west side of the city, for anybody familiar with Indianapolis, and always wanted to do something in architecture or design, and so had my sights set on Ball State from a young age, but really just loved, when I came to Ball State, just figured out that I really just loved communities and how they worked kind of within themselves and with their surrounding areas and the city that they might be in, the city context, and so was on the urban planning path, and I think was able to learn a lot of valuable things through that program, and then be involved in things throughout the city of Muncie. Probably came to this building in 2013 or 2014 before really anything was here, and so it's really neat to see what you guys have done with this space since then. But after I graduated, I kind of immediately was able to get in a community development corporation on the east side of Indianapolis, and have been there ever since. So a little over 7 years now, and in that time have got to have a lot of different experiences, really with the foundation that the Community Development Corporation and the community itself has built within itself and with its neighbors, and with the city and the state as well. So in that time, the neighborhood has changed a lot. You'll see some pictures from really not that long ago, from when a lot of our buildings were abandoned and needed a lot of work on them, and some of that work Englewood has been able to do, some of that work has been done by others. So it's a really interesting conversation about where we are now, and kind of how our work has shifted to really providing as much affordable housing as possible, as a lot of market rate development is kind of moving in around us, and really thinking through that with our partners, and what does that conversation look like. So I'll go through this presentation. Obviously, if you guys have any questions as we're going through, go ahead and ask those questions so we can talk about that. And I tried to, you'll kind of see, I tried to kind of go through a bigger picture level at first, kind of give you the context of where Englewood is in our city, and then zoom in a little bit more to some of the specific projects that we've done over time, and some of the things that I've gotten to be involved in. So that'll kind of be how this goes, if I put this together correctly. So just briefly, what drew me to community development and being able to work at a community development corporation was really that it was people and place-based focus, that we get to solve a lot of problems in community development in a lot of different ways, using a lot of different tools. We get to work with all kinds of people and organizations, from neighbors on the ground to our city and state representatives to a bunch of different funders, and people like colleges and students who are coming through and wanting to do different work to teach their students. And then we really get to see how development gets done, both kind of the larger scale development across the city, and then even just following kind of a development project through from inception to completion. Really has been a really exciting part of what I've been able to witness. So I'll kind of start at a big picture level. So my organization, and also where I live in the Englewood neighborhood, is located on the Near East Side of Indianapolis. And that is primarily the 46201 zip code. It's gone through a lot of changes. During the housing crisis, the 46201 zip code had the largest foreclosure rate in the country. So we've had a lot of experience with abandoned homes and buildings, and that has changed drastically over time. You can see maybe the little red star where our neighborhood is located. So the kind of south borderline is just south of Washington Street. Washington Street is U.S. National Road 40 that runs across the country. So a lot of industrial and like car-oriented businesses along that stretch. We're also just east of where the Cap Indy Center is located, kind of right on this border right here. And we are, just outside of downtown Indianapolis, so where a lot of activity happens within the 465 loop. I'll be good there. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the organizations that we've been able to work with over time, and some of these are funders, some of these are neighborhood partners, and this kind of just shows the breadth of partnerships that we've been able to have that have really led to a lot of the development in the neighborhood. So a couple of those at the top, the John Bonner Neighborhood Centers and Near East Area Renewal are two other pretty impactful. The community center is the John Bonner Neighborhood Center, and another CDC near that have kind of teamed up with Englewood CDC to do a lot of the work on the Near East Side. And that includes some planning processes that you'll see in just a minute, as well as a lot of the physical development. And we kind of all have our little niches in the development world. So Englewood CDC has done a lot more of the kind of rental housing development. Near has done a lot of the single-family home ownership development. The John Bonner Neighborhood Centers has done a lot with kind of supportive services for a lot of our neighbors, economic empowerment and financial literacy and things like that. And then you'll see a lot of the other partners, and I'll get into some of them in just a little bit. And this is just a snapshot, of course, of people we've been able to work with. Take a sip of water. So something that has been really impactful for the Near East Side in general, I would say, and then also our organization, is the number of what we would call collective impact initiatives that we've been able to be a part of really since about 2006 or so, starting with the Near East Side Quality of Life Plan that was coming about that time when people were starting to look at downtown areas again, wanting to be invested in Indianapolis, neighborhoods close to downtown. And so that was a plan that was done with input from 400 plus neighbors over a series of years that was funded by the City of Indianapolis and LISC Indianapolis, Local Initiative Support Corporation, which has been a big leader in kind of collective impact initiatives. And so that really is just taking a look at all kinds of different things that impact quality of life of a resident in our neighborhood: housing, economic development, health and wellness, supportive services, transportation, all those kinds of things, and how those different areas could be improved or invested in to increase everybody's quality of life in the neighborhood. So that's kind of did direct a lot of the work for Englewood CDC and other partners in the neighborhood for probably 15 or so years. And then we did an update on that plan in kind of 2019, 2020, which was outdated probably a little sooner because of the COVID pandemic, and kind of thinking about how needs have shifted of residents since that time. But that's pretty impactful for the whole Near East Side. And then we've done some work with this vision plan, and then the Re-Energize East Washington Street plan to really think about commercial development on our main commercial strip, which is Washington Street, that Englewood sits directly on and straddles the whole Near East Side. And how can we reinvest in businesses along East Washington Street? In its current state, it's not going to be the most pedestrian-friendly street because it is traditionally the national road. But how can we make it more pedestrian-friendly? How can we add businesses to that corridor? How can we either support the businesses that are there, or bring businesses and employees back to the area? And then I'll touch on this a little bit later, but we also have a specific plan for the Englewood neighborhood itself, and that was also funded through LISC in about 2015, and it was kind of my position when I first started was the Great Places Coordinator. So there were 5 designated neighborhoods in Indianapolis that were called these Great Places neighborhoods. It was really thinking about how can we create like a quarter-mile walk radius in your neighborhood that would have kind of everything somebody would need to thrive. So like affordable housing, jobs, education, access to healthy food, things like that, and really focusing on a very small walk radius and investing in that area. That's kind of a high-level overview of those initiatives. This is a snapshot from the Great Places Plan, and just to give you a little more information about our neighborhood in particular. The kind of the population demographics, about 40% white at this point, and then about 24% African American, 28% Hispanic. Pretty low median family income in comparison to the kind of MSA, and that's been pretty consistent over time, and a fairly low education level as well, with 35% of adults with less than a high school diploma. So that is kind of a brief snapshot. And then going in a little bit further, brief just look at where my organization is in Englewood Christian Church building. The Englewood church itself was started in 1895, so it's been in the neighborhood for a very long time. Moved buildings a few times since then. But we also have a Spanish-speaking arm of the congregation that's there called Mano de Amistad. And then there's a child care center that was started about the same time as Englewood CDC that also occupies that space. So this is a pretty typical kind of rotation of the city that you guys would probably recognize for Muncie as well. So the Englewood neighborhood in general was pretty successful through the 40s, 50s, 60s. We had a couple pretty large industrial job creators, one of them directly in our neighborhood called the P.R. Mallory factory that employed about 1,500 people. And then the RCA plant just north of our neighborhood employed about 8,000 people at its height. So a lot of people were living close to our neighborhood and working at those jobs. A lot of retail along Washington Street, and just kind of a booming neighborhood, or maybe a suburb of Indianapolis at that point. And then those companies left in about the 70s or so you've got the loss of those jobs, a pretty significant population decline, and then kind of that housing vacancy and the destruction of some of the civic infrastructure around the neighborhood. And some of these photos were kind of what I came into even in 2012, 13, 14. A lot of boarded up buildings still, a lot of vacant space or areas that needed some reinvestment, and over time have been slowly able to do that reinvestment and as inclusively and affordably as possible to keep the neighbors in our neighborhood that still want to remain. And this is kind of reiterating what I said on the previous slide, but Englewood CDC and Daystar Child Care are both located in the Englewood Christian Church building, started in about 1997, and really started out of a small portion of the Englewood Church congregation who was still present at the church, which was one of the largest non-denominational churches in the country in like the 40s and 50s. And then as white flight happened, a lot of folks moved out and weren't living in the neighborhood anymore, weren't attending the church. And so a small group of them in the early 90s or so were kind of thinking about, how do we keep this going? How do we invest in the surrounding neighborhood? And kind of the response to that was both moving back into the neighborhood that was significantly declining, and really being involved with neighbors in the surrounding area and getting to know them and getting to know kind of what would be beneficial and helpful to them. And that involved both kind of starting this community development corporation arm to do some of that work, and providing Daystar Child Care, which gave work to a lot of the single moms in the neighborhood and helped care for a lot of the kids in the neighborhood as well. Okay, so that's a little bit of a break point about the neighborhood and the community. Any questions before I go into Englewood CDC specifically? Or comments? Cool. Great. So I'll kind of focus on broad strokes, like what what our focus has been, and that's definitely shifted over time, the almost 30 years that we've been around, and then go a little bit more specifically into some of the projects that we've done a little more recently. So you can see our mission statement on the left. I won't read that to you, but basically what I just mentioned, thinking about how can we love our neighbors, love those around us in the areas of community, what you would think of like community development. So how can we provide affordable housing? How can we provide jobs? How can we provide a place for kids to play? And really thinking about that whole quality of life. And obviously as the neighborhood has changed, that has changed. As our kind of community development culture as a city has changed, we've adapted to that and been able to provide some different services at different times. And this flow chart kind of shows what I was mentioning as well about how a lot of those collective impact like plans that are listed in that green box impact the work that we choose to do. So we want to make sure that our work is tied to what neighbors have said that they want to see in the neighborhood through those planning processes, which are all kind of open planning processes for neighbors to kind of give a say in what they want to see in the neighborhood. And then from that planning process, we kind of go through and say, okay, these are some things that we can take on. These are some projects that we can do that kind of can point back to those plans and say, yes, this was approved by neighbors. This is kind of what people are looking for. And so that's kind of that middle line. And then the far right line leads to specific developments or initiatives that we've worked on over time that have come out of that planning process. Just a snapshot of our organizational chart. We now are probably the biggest community development corporation in Indianapolis. A lot of that is due to us doing our own property management and maintenance. So a lot of our staff are property managers at our affordable rental developments. And so that's a majority of this left portion. And then we do have some other arms, including community and development. And so that's where I live and work in doing a lot of our partnerships with the city, with the state, getting funding, and then working on a lot of our development initiatives and a little bit of maybe some like community programming that we might do. This middle cultivating communities arm is something that we started a little more recently, but kind of came out of what we've done over time, which is working with other faith-based organizations like churches, and as they have been able to see a little bit of what Englewood has done over time in working in affordable housing and working in economic development and thinking about how they might do that in their own spaces. And so just kind of consolidating a lot of those conversations and working on a more consulting arm that's been funded a little bit by the Lilly Endowment through some of their initiatives. And so we've got a full team that works currently in Indianapolis with 7 different congregations in 7 different neighborhoods around Indianapolis to really help them go through a process of like what asset-based community development. So what assets do you guys have in your neighborhood, in your congregation that could help you get to these maybe goals that you have or goals that the community has, really building capacity in those congregations to help this work continue in other areas of the city that maybe Englewood CDC as a development organization is not going to go in and like do a bunch of development projects in these other areas, but to build capacity in organizations that could do that. And then the last one is just our, not just, they're very important, our accounting financial arm that makes sure we're not overspending all our money. Okay, so the next couple slides are just a little bit about some of the commercial development and economic development that we've done specifically on the East Washington Street corridor in our neighborhood. So this specifically comes from some of the East Washington Street plans that we've done over time, really from the west side being downtown Indianapolis where 465 kind of split there, and then going east to about Sherman or Emerson. It's about a 3-mile stretch or so of East Washington Street. And I think at the time we started this, I had this stat, the vacancy rate on East Washington Street was maybe like 75% or so of businesses that were gone, vacant buildings or just land that was available, businesses that had moved out. And this work started in maybe 2012. And since then, I think that statistic has kind of flipped. So it's now like 75% occupied of businesses that have come back and occupied the space. And so some of that has been work that we have directly been a part of. Some of that has been work that is built on work that we've done alongside other partners. And some of that is bringing businesses back, and some of that is thinking of the safety of East Washington Street. It's a very busy stretch of road, and people fly through the area. And so thinking about how we use that space. This upper right-hand photo was a Better Blocks program, I think, where you kind of did some rogue, I'm forgetting the name of it, but just putting some barriers in Washington Street, some medians and things, and seeing how traffic adjusted, and seeing what it would look like for people to kind of use the sidewalks and be out on East Washington Street. And we've also gotten to do a lot with bringing employees back to businesses, providing them. We've gotten to use a federal grant a few times that provides very low interest loans to some businesses to improve their facilities, and then in turn they hire a percentage of low income employees for a time. So they kind of report their jobs to us and prioritize lower income folks who are coming from the neighborhood to work at their facilities. We've also gotten to do a facade program, so we've gotten to work with a lot of businesses who might need new signage or might need upgraded lighting or security, or even a whole new, some of them have been more in depth and been whole new storefronts and things like that to improve the businesses that way, and that's been a very successful program as well. And zooming in a little bit further on our neighborhood in particular, this just kind of shows some of the businesses that we've been able to provide real estate to, or some of the community spaces that we've been able to produce right within our neighborhood, right within like that quarter-mile walk radius that I was talking about, to bring either jobs to the area or bring spaces where people can hang out and enjoy themselves. And so some of those are a small Mexican restaurant right here that was just a tiny little restaurant tiny little just like garage really that we were able to renovate for a guy who wanted to start a tamale shop. And then we were able to expand into a seating area for that restaurant. And a plug for that, they were just on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives last Friday. They premiered. I have a very small line in it, but we were able to celebrate that restaurant owner who's been there now for about 12 years and has worked very hard, came from Mexico, and is now a nationally recognized restaurant. So that was really exciting for us. And a couple other businesses. I will point out that a lot of what we've tried to do with our businesses is either provide the real estate to somebody looking to come in to start a business or a nonprofit, and most of those have been minority-owned businesses or first-time business owners or nonprofits who are serving our community in some way. So that's really what we aim for in those spaces. What else in here? We have a couple garden spaces or like pocket parks in our neighborhood that we've tried to use well and preserve as green spaces in that area. One of them was a lot that directly came from Intend, Indiana, the land bank in Indianapolis. So we've gotten to use that for that purpose. We have an apartment building that was an old IPS school, and we've got a gym that we rent out to community members, and our daycare uses it all the time. And then we also have a rooftop hockey deck on that school building as well, where we've got hockey leagues that play up there. I haven't talked this long in a long time, so my voice is not used to that. And then briefly, just a snapshot of some of the economic development and residential development work since we started tracking the East Washington Street and the Great Places Plan in about 2014 or so, I think. So you can just see a quick snapshot of not all projects that we have done directly, but directly and kind of indirectly that have happened in our area, which is pretty exciting. Let's see. Okay, so a few more slides on the Great Places program, as that has been really impactful since it started in about 2015 to the work that we've been able to do and the investment, kind of outside investment that we've been able to bring to the neighborhood. And I keep saying we, and I'm not really referencing Englewood CDC itself. It's really been a more broader kind of collective work with other organizations in the neighborhood. So I'm more so referring to kind of we as in these partners here and then other community partners on the Near East Side. Englewood certainly hasn't done it all by themselves. So the Great Places plan, I wasn't part of the planning process. I kind of came in right after that, a year or two into the plan itself. But basically, LISC Indianapolis is a kind of backbone organization for community development corporations in Indianapolis and community centers as well. They're also a community development finance, CDFI, community development finance, thank you, institution.
Who's that?
LISC.
LISC.
Yeah, LISC Indianapolis. So they have maybe 40 other branches around the country of LISC in other cities. But then CDFI's Intend is also a CDFI. We've got a couple other community development finance institutions in the city who can help kind of lend funds at a lower rate for community work. But LISC and the city primarily kind of pioneered this Great Places program, and the initial round was 3 neighborhoods, I believe, that were chosen for this planning process, and then to provide additional investment and funding in these specific neighborhoods around the city. And I'm not sure what all of the requirements were, but generally kind of a disinvested neighborhood, but one that had some high capacity organizations within the neighborhood that were willing to take this on and spearhead this work to bring other resources to the neighborhood. And so you can see some of our other partner organizations that signed on to say, yes, we will kind of prioritize investment in these neighborhoods going forward. And we did a lot of planning work to figure out what's the current state of the neighborhood, what's kind of the vacancy rate, what's the crime statistics, what's the education level, all these different things, so that we could track that over time and kind of see if this program works to improve quality of life in the neighborhood. And the yellow star here is where Englewood CDC's offices are, and then the like main walk area was right about here is the center of that, and then about a quarter mile around that area is where we focused our work. So you can see that focus area highlighted in this map here, and then pointed out a lot of the significant projects that we've done since 2015 or so that have been within that area. And the Great Places program kind of has 4 pillars. It goes with love thy neighborhood, very catchy. And the 4 pillars are livability, which is really kind of a catch-all for the other, anything that's not covered in the other 3 initiatives is in livability. So we had an outdoor concert series for a little while. We've got a larger nature play space and garden right in the middle of our neighborhood that's got a lot of different natural features. Our daycare uses it all the time. People use it for summer summer in the garden, graduation parties, all kinds of different things. It's got some orchard trees, it's got a fire pit, and something that we've been able to add to over time. And this would also have to do with like sustainability features or access to healthy food, things like that. Opportunity is specifically like economic development and job creation, so highlighted a few of our economic development projects over time. And then vitality, you've got primarily affordable housing is what we're looking at here. You can see an image. We have better images. This was taken on a gray day, but of the alley house that Ball State designed and built with us just recently. And then education is pretty straightforward, so have worked on several education initiatives. Okay. All right, now we'll get to some of the projects that we've been a part of. So we have gotten to do a lot of different things, and I try to highlight some that are more kind of redevelopment focused, which is a lot of what we've done. So really tried to save as many buildings as possible, not tear down and start from scratch. So this is one building on East Washington Street that's in our kind of economic development corridor. It was an old Oddfellows lodge and was abandoned for a long time. It was abandoned when I first started. And at one point the city had owned it. The roof caved in after a really big storm, completely blew off. You can kind of see down here where it's just open to the elements. And the city was looking to demolish it, and we requested that they not demolish it, and we, I think, purchased it for maybe $100 from the city at the time, and then stabilized it, put a roof on it, and then was able to sell it to somebody who started a coffee shop on the first floor that's still there, impressively, an event space on the top floor that's really beautiful, in this old theater room on the far right side there. You can see a lot of beautiful weddings and events happen there. And then they also started Ash and Elm Cider Company on the first floor of that space, which has grown into a really large cidery that has recently expanded to some other locations. So a really successful overall project that would have been torn down if not for somebody wanting to save it. So here's Clowley again. Everybody says it a little bit differently. And you can kind of see the initial building. I actually don't know where we got, I assume we just bought it pretty cheaply back in 2011 or so. And was able to get some funding through LISC and the city, I think, to initially put a facade on it. It was a really small, 400 square, just walk up tamale shop when he started it. And then a couple years later, there was the need for kind of some seating space there. Things were going well, and so we got a grant from the city through their CDBG program to do that expansion, and they now have an indoor seating area and a really nice patio space out back, and are continuing to do the same things there. So that's been very successful. Okay, so this is a little bit bigger project, still more on kind of the economic development side. So this is the PR Mallard campus, which was the biggest job creator in our neighborhood specifically, and kind of went through that process. It was, the campus was built in 1920 or so, and it was actually built by General Electric. General Electric never occupied it. They sold it to PR Mallory in 1929, right before the crash. And so PR Mallory occupied it and was very successful. This was their international headquarters in the Englewood neighborhood. And they are a company that produced a lot of small mechanical and electrical things that go in larger appliances, capacitors, timers, just a lot of different little mechanisms was kind of their bread and butter. They patented the Duracell battery on this campus at some point, and I think I have a slide on the history. So they occupied it for about 50 years, did a lot of R&D for the government, where it was involved in some pieces that were on the atomic bomb that were dropped. They were involved in the NASA kind of space race and had some pieces on the Apollo, was the first one that went there, 11? That went to the moon. So they were a very big company. They were on the campus for about 50 years and then left, and so the building was abandoned ever since then. I jumped ahead a little bit. There's a little bit of interesting history before Mallory got there. The site was also the first home of the Indianapolis Indians baseball team for about 3 or 4 years, and so there's a kind of photograph of that. And then there was also an amusement park that was on the site called Wonderland that was there for also about 3 or 4 years, and then mysteriously burned one night and was destroyed. And so those two things were before General Electric built the campus. But you can kind of see here the bird's eye view. There were about 10 or 12 buildings on the site at its height. And by the time that we got around to it, there were maybe 3 or 4 left. Some of them had been demolished pretty recently by the city. So this is the main administration building. It's about 120,000 square feet. So this is the main building that was left by the time we got to it. Another aerial view, you can kind of see some of the campus. So another community development corporation owned it in the 90s and early 2000s and wasn't able to do much with it. And then it kind of went back to the city, so the city owned it for a while. And then in about 2015 or so, there was a push by Purdue University to get more of to get more students from the Center Township, like Indianapolis Public School District, to Purdue University, because they weren't seeing a lot of students getting into Purdue at that time. And so they really wanted to start like a charter school in Indianapolis that would be focused on their programs, and then when you graduate, if you meet the minimum requirements, you get automatic entrance to Purdue University. And so they landed on this site as an ideal location for their school, and from that, the city and Englewood CDC and the John Bonner Neighborhood Centers, our local community center, kind of teamed up to figure out how to revitalize this site. And there towards the end, the land bank also kind of stepped in and took the site for a little while before we were able to close on all the financing. So in total, it was about a $38 million development and included a lot of different funding sources from new market tax credits and historic tax credits. It's on the historic registry, both the national one and the local one. And then what's called Dino tax credits from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which are also known as industrial recovery tax credits. So a lot of different funding mechanisms that went into this, but we have a beautiful administration building now that was completely rehabbed, and then there was a second building on the site just south of this building that was rehabbed as well. And you can see this is the first graduating class from Purdue Polytechnic, the school, one of the schools that's there now. And so they use the top 2 floors of the building, and then we have a local middle school that occupies the bottom 2 floors. And then the back building on the campus is used as a robotics lab for these schools as well, so they do a lot of robotics work there. And their goal has been reached. They continue to send at least 30 to 40, I think, students from their graduating classes to Purdue University, which is, I think they were sending maybe 5 or 6 before from all of the IPS school district. So that's a big win for them. That's Pierre Mallory. Okay, getting close to done. We have, just wanted to highlight a few of the housing development work that we've done over time, which I would say for Englewood started for the first 10 or 15 years as slowly rehabbing individual homes in the neighborhood. We had a lot of vacant homes that needed to either be rehabbed for somebody that was currently living there, or could be rehabbed and rented or sold to somebody looking to come to the neighborhood. So that was a lot of the work as Englewood CDC started. It was pretty much all done with either volunteers or funding in-house. A lot of people that first started would take out mortgages on their own homes to fix up a new home and kind of recoup those funds and then do the same thing on the next home. So that was how a couple really a couple whole blocks in the neighborhood got rehabbed in that way over the first 10 or 15 years. And then in about 2012, there was a lot of attention on the Near East Side with the Super Bowl that came to Indianapolis, and there was a whole like Super Bowl project that focused on parts of the Near East Side and really put a spotlight on the work that the Near East Side was doing with the quality of life plan and affordable housing and things like that. And so with that, we got some extra capacity and started doing affordable rental development, which included a lot of different apartment buildings. And you can see here, these are 5 developments that have just been completed. They've all been completed really in the past 12 months, which is a huge spike in what we've done previously. So we have really doubled our ownership and management of affordable rental housing in the past year. So we have, by the end of next year, we'll have about 450 units, which are pretty much all affordable housing, and a lot of that is also permanent supportive housing. So it's focused on folks who are coming out of homelessness, who have been chronically homeless, and also have either a mental or physical disability. And so those are the folks that get placed in permanent supportive housing. And so we're also providing or partnering with organizations who provide a lot of services to those individuals. So I'll highlight a few. Oxford Place Senior Apartments was our second multifamily development funded with low-income housing tax credits. In our neighborhood, just south of Washington Street, was an old Crown Laundry facility, was a huge brownfield site, required millions of dollars of cleanup that the city did before we acquired the land. And so we acquired the site and worked on kind of a 3-phase development for that. So currently we have 2 of those phases completed, which is a total of 69 units of affordable senior housing. And then we still have an open 3rd phase that we're looking at what to do. But this was designed as the first net energy positive affordable housing development in the state that we are aware of. So it's got a whole roof of solar panels. It's got a carport that's got a bunch of solar panels. It's got a greenhouse in it. A number of other features just with the tightness of the building that make it net energy positive. Unfortunately, is never run that way because of the restrictions that our electric company puts on what we can buy and sell back to the grid. So we are not actually able to use the energy that we make to sell back, to use it in-house. We have to sell it back to the grid and then buy it back at a much higher price, which is a whole other situation. But that's Oxford Place Senior Apartments. Oxford Flats is kind of a medium-size, kind of missing middle housing development. It's a 15-unit building that is just across the street from our offices. It took 3 single-family lots. I think we had to demo 2 homes on this one that was a fire burnout and one that was pretty far gone itself, and demoed those and then built 15 units of housing. It's like a walk-up unit. You can kind of see on the back, just some stairs that go up, and is generally, it's 11 affordable units and 4 market rate units, and was kind of a test to see if there are other ways to build density in the neighborhood. This is right on Washington Street, which is the next step in the bus rapid transit system for Indianapolis. So looking to build that density next to Washington Street to hopefully make sure that bus rapid transit system works the way it's supposed to. And then we recently did, I don't know if I have pictures of it, we recently did a very similar building a little bit further out that is also 15 units. Okay. Passage is another building that was just completed, and it is kind of significant because it's outside of our Englewood neighborhood. It's very close to downtown, and it was through a special funding round of IHCDA, who runs the rental housing tax credit program, and it's specifically for with some units set aside for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so there's a career center on the first floor run by Noble, who's a service provider for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the site itself was an old parking lot for a larger organization right there, and was held in an equitable transit-oriented development fund that the Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership has. And so they kind of hold lots that are on transit lines or on up-and-coming transit lines for affordable housing. So we were able to use that lot for this purpose. And this opened just about a year ago, or just a year in. And then this one is probably the one that highlights our relationship with Intend the most. So this is a recent 20-unit scattered site development. You can see all the pins in the neighborhood for lots that we acquired from the land bank or the city. Most of them were through the land bank for about $1,500 each, which is pretty cheap for Indianapolis. And built these duplexes on each of the lots. We didn't tear down any homes, they were all vacant already, and we were able to build, also through the rental housing tax credit program, some more family style homes, which is something we hadn't done in a while. We'd focused on apartment developments, 1 and 2 bedroom units, which weren't serving our families the best. We'd also just opened the PR Mallory building with a bunch of students and their families that are coming to the building every day, folks that might want to live closer to their school, or parents who might want to live closer to their kids' schools. And so open this development. It's pretty much all occupied by single moms with their kids, and I think has been, and most of them have kids that go to those 2 schools in our neighborhood. So I think from that standpoint, it's been a success. And then one of these homes is our alley house that was built by designed and built by the Ball State CAP folks. Yeah. And then I'll just mention briefly, this is the last project to highlight. We've also been shifting back a little bit more to home ownership. So a lot of what we did at the beginning was home ownership. We didn't get into rental and really until we did the multifamily developments. Now we're seeing that switch back to folks wanting more home ownership opportunities in the neighborhood. And so these are also lots that were acquired either from the land bank or from the city. The city was looking to get, to kind of push these lots out to be developed for affordable housing. And so this is just a highlight of a lot of land that we own in a small area. And so where the number 4 is and the number 1 are lots that we were able to acquire from the city or the land bank, and are working on some homeownership opportunities, specifically in modular construction. So working with Volumod, which is out of Indianapolis, who does some, or only does modular construction in a factory and then delivers the boxes to the site. And so we've got some 2- and 3-story townhomes that are going up that are for sale affordably in our neighborhood. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for hanging in there with me. There we go. Yeah.
I know my students have some questions.
I saw one. 1 and 2. Yes.
Sorry, I'll have you explain it. I missed it. When you start in an area that has like 75% vacancy, like in East Washington Street,
Mm-hmm.
how do you like incentivize businesses to want to?
That is a good question. So I think kind of having that vision plan and showing like these, this is an area that we are working to redevelop, and giving folks the, helping them buy land, helping them find workers and things like that, being able to walk folks through that process, I think is helpful. A lot of it was encouraging folks to stay through, like, we'll help you fix up your facade, we'll help you find some employees, or helping folks who might be interested in coming back to the area kind of through that process of, like, we can help you get some land, we can help you with connect to financing for your development or things like that, kind of being a guide, I guess, through the process would be one. Yeah. Yes.
So I noticed you had some areas targeted as industrial
Yeah.
areas.
Mm-hmm.
How do you target or identify industries that would be compatible with a neighborhood setting? I would guess people don't want a smelter in their neighborhood or
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
How do you think through that?
So the area that specifically was targeted as industrial is south of Washington Street and north of the CSX railroad tracks. So it's like a block, a block radius north and south going all the way along East Washington Street. So it's historically always been industrial. And I would say we were targeting industrial, but like light industrial. So like maker spaces or just like, manufacturing that wouldn't turn people off from living there. But it's pretty much all between Washington Street and those railroad tracks, and consolidated there, which has proved difficult for residential. There is residential in that block as well, and so have also, on the flip side, worked to change some of that zoning that needs to be changed to residential that way as well. Yeah. Yes.
So I live here in Muncie and
Yeah.
I work in Indianapolis, and I see projects like this happening at the neighborhood level.
Yep.
And I wonder, what advice do you have for communities like Muncie that are shrinking, that have increasing levels of blight, abandonment? How do you build capacity to do that kind of work?
Yeah. Great question. I think from what I know, a lot of what you guys are doing is super helpful right now, having like conversations like this about how to use tools like the land bank and like other tools to target development in specific areas. I think one thing that we have learned and has worked well is to find common ground with all of your partners, with the city, with the nonprofit organizations, on specific things that you want to work on, whether it's affordable housing or economic development or anything like that, and work through, what can everybody bring to the table that would move this further along. And so working all together in one direction as much as you can, in order to kind of see those small steps and kind of see the small wins, to generate excitement for some of the bigger projects. Yeah. I saw you.
You talked a lot about working with small
Mm-hmm.
businesses in the area.
Yeah.
What kind of rules and plans can you put in place to better those relationships for the long term of a plan like this? Like incentives or programs? You said you were offering funding for facade changes or stuff like that.
Yeah, a lot of that also has come through larger funders who want to work with small businesses, minority-owned businesses, kind of first-time business owners. And there's a lot of like resources out there, but it can be so difficult for small businesses to navigate that. And so we've spent a lot of time working on like roadmaps for small businesses, or like kind of like I was saying with the bringing businesses back to the area, is really being willing to like handhold and guide small businesses through that process. And I think part of it is also longevity at organizations. And if you have a ton of turnover, if your contacts are always changing, then that's really hard for a small business to kind of figure out what's going on. And so I think longevity has been, in some of these organizations, has been super helpful. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Yes. Yeah. Our organization specifically? Yes. So a lot of what we've done is affordable rental development, but then we're also the property manager and do like the property maintenance currently for all of the affordable rentals that we've developed. So really we've done a lot of development, but our specialty kind of focus has been on that property management side and working with folks who are coming from all kinds of situations. Yeah.
Well, this is like a two-part question.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to know that because I've gotten calls from people, male or female,
Uh-huh.
who are convicted felons.
Yeah.
Who can't get rental.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
Right.
So I'm wondering is community development trying to develop some type of programming where they can also have housing? Because I strongly believe everyone should be in some type of housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, those are also conversations that we are a part of, and it's slightly outside of my wheelhouse because I'm not on the property management side, but any organization can choose to widen their like tenant selection plan, basically. So you can widen that really. And our policy is to like screen people in instead of screening them out. So have like pretty broad policies so that when folks apply, we can accept as many as possible. And so that is the way a lot of affordable housing policies are going, just because of that recognition. But there's still a lot of work to do on like how that fleshes out in practice, of course. But yeah, that's a lot of like advocacy work, I would say, that's going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. Go ahead.
Would you mind sharing what your annual budget is, and then, or roughly?
Yeah.
And then kind of the makeup of your funding sources?
Mm-hmm.
Rental income and grants and things.
Yes, yeah. I just had to write this down. Yeah, it's generally been, over the past little while, it's been like 3 to 4 million, I think, is the annual budget. A lot of that is, and some of that's been inflated over the past couple years, specifically with some of the larger grants that we've gotten from the Lilly Endowment to do our Cultivating Communities work. So that inflated it just a little bit. But generally it's the Community Development Corporation budget is separate from all our like property budgets, so that separates it out a little bit, but probably half of that is like grants and other funding sources like that are coming in, and then some of it is from property income, but that's not a moneymaker for us at all, and so a lot of times we as a management company are losing money on those buildings just because the rent is set at a certain amount, and one of our biggest principles is eviction prevention. So at all costs, we are not evicting people, especially for like non-payment of rent. So anyways, that is generally a loss at this point, and then. Some of it comes from we have one fundraiser a year, so some of it comes from that. A lot of that goes to rental assistance for neighbors. And then, there's some other buckets. Other, other rental income, so some of the commercial spaces that we rent out don't make a ton of money, but they bring in some. Yeah.
So a follow-up question to that, about what percentage of the cost of the low-income rental has to be subsidized by donations to make it work?
Not donations, it's pretty much all funded from either the rental housing tax credit program, the development of it is funded, development or management of it. Ongoing maintenance. Theoretically, the building should cover their costs, so they generally pay for staff time. What we lose out on, for the most part, is like the management fee that we should get from managing the building. But generally, they would cover like a part-time maintenance person and like a part-time property management person. And we are continually looking for, I would say what we're focused on and like looking for grant funds for now is the time that property managers and maybe a couple other staff spend in delivering services to those residents. So a lot of that is like mental health services that we've looked for funding for to provide like a specific mental health service provider for a couple buildings, because that's a big need. And then always looking for additional funding for like, we always are giving out bus passes to residents. We're always looking for funds to look for other modes of transportation is a huge thing, or like food delivery is another, like grocery delivery kind of is a big need of residents. We pay for Wi-Fi at the buildings, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of those accessory things are funded by other grants, but theoretically the buildings cover kind of the staff time.
Is there a fund being set back in for maintenance or repairs, obsolescence?
Yes, and all the buildings come funded at the beginning with like an operating reserve or like a services reserve or something like that that we can draw on in the case of a large issue. But they kind of built into their budgets are the regular maintenance and operating, things like that. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, in our class, we've been reading about social capital, building social capital, asset-based community development, participatory action, research, kind of like the goal of, through a process, folks are the social fabric strengthening, people are growing capacity and the decision-making ability, their confidence as a community to do other things. Thinking about your experience, theoretical perspective and then a practical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see those things actually meeting? You mentioned asset-based community development.
Yes.
You mentioned about doing like plans with the neighborhood.
Yep.
To be able to come back and be like, hey, you guys said this.
Yep.
But how important do you feel like that real, building community and connection and all those things? How important is that to your all's work?
Yes.
How do you continue to kind of like keep that as a priority? So you're doing work with rather than doing work on.
Yeah. Great question. I would say it's one of the most important things for our organization, and I think for our community in general. Back when, and this is all from what I've heard, because I was in maybe middle school at this time, back in 2006 or so with the Quality of Life Plan, there were a lot of people that were interested in participating in this kind of community building work because there were so many issues in the neighborhood, like because there were so many abandoned buildings, because crime was so high, because there were no jobs anywhere, et cetera, et cetera. There were so many people that were ready to like get involved and see a change, and everybody had something that they wanted to fight for and improve. And so bringing everybody together was a lot easier than it is now when, we still have a lot of issues. The other day we had 3 shootings in a half a mile of my office. But people have, generally, there's more housing, there's more jobs, there's a lot of other things to focus on than coming together as a community to like fix some different issues. So I would say going through the process, going through like a planning process when there was a lot of issues, it was a lot easier to bring people together. And there were a lot of like small wins that you could see that would get people really excited. In terms of now, a lot of those things have been achieved, and so people feel pretty not as motivated to keep working towards some of the bigger goals. I would say for our organization in particular, one of the biggest things that has drawn people to the work and kept us working is that a large majority of our staff also live in the neighborhood, live within walking distance of the office, are interacting with neighbors that we're serving all the time. And so being a resident of the neighborhood and working for the organization, while not a requirement, is something that's driven our organization for a long time and really contributes to that longevity at the organization. People aren't motivated to kind of move around because we've chosen to live in this neighborhood and that's where we want to work for a long time. So I would say that is very participatory and continues to keep people involved and keep people kind of talking to their neighbors, seeing what's going on a real world basis, and allows us to say, you know, decisions that we are making are also affecting us and our families in this neighborhood, and we're going to working towards making the best decision for everybody. We kind of understand what's going on here in some different ways, because a lot of us are more well off than a lot of our neighbors, but are at least able to kind of witness the same things. Yeah, does that answer your question? Great, yes.
I know that you talked about that some community organizations fund your support for projects. What level of involvement did they have in the design? Did you kind of go into it with the idea for it, or did you kind of talk to them about what they might want to see around the neighborhood?
Yeah. So maybe thinking specifically about like the Great Places Plan, we had some like citywide funders that were very interested in like seeing different quality of life improvements in different neighborhoods, but I would say are not to the level where they're going to like dictate the projects that go on. The posture is very much like we want the community-based organizations who are working in these neighborhoods to come up with the project and really take hold of that, and like we will support this if there's community buy-in, which kind of was the point of the Great Places Plan, was to get community investment, to get community buy-in, and then build the capacity of some of those organizations to then carry out some of those goals. And so, yeah, generally some of our organizations will like drive some different higher level projects, like we want to focus on education or we want to focus on affordable housing, and then leave it to the community-based organizations to really know what is best for that neighborhood and present them with like a specific project to fund. Yes.
How often do you like engage with the community, and how do you like gather community interest in relationships? Relations with community building?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably depends a little bit on what we mean when we're talking about community. I would say a lot of us interact with the community on a regular basis. A lot of us interact with the neighbors we serve, like our residents, on a regular basis, because we've got folks in that building. We've got folks who are consistently knowing specific details about what is going on with residents, what needs they have, and things like that. The broader community, I think this goes back to a little bit about what I was saying. When there's a big issue or when there's a concern, like we will hear about it and we will be engaged in that. When there's not like a big issue, we as a larger Near Eastside group have found it very difficult to engage with people on a regular basis over just over things that aren't a big issue, because everybody has so many different priorities that it's really hard to get people in a room to like talk about something that's maybe a little more theoretical, or like just some more theoretical topics without there being something very specific to focus on or a concern to like solve. And then the second part of your question was what? Oh yeah, and I would say kind of the same thing. There's a lot of community events that take place, especially with our residents, for our residents, really trying to build community among those that we serve, like in buildings, and really the impetus behind doing a lot of our affordable housing or permanent supportive housing is to encourage interaction between people of different economic levels, and really seeing some of the beauty behind that. And so encouraging people to get together and congregate as much as possible. There's, obviously with COVID, there was a long time when we just weren't doing that very much, and there's still a lot of people that don't really want to gather. But I think we're trying to do that a little bit more now and provide spaces for people to get together. Yes. I also saw one over here. No? Yes.
I had one comment.
Oh, yeah.
Than a question, but so the college of architecture plans now worked with Englewood CDC for about 4 years or so, and we've had almost 100 students in college who have worked with the CDC.
Yeah.
And benefited from that community and partnership, and it's been a total delight for us. And I know we continue to be inspired and impressed by all that you're doing. It's actually really cool to see how it's expanded over time in just the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And I guess for everybody in the room, if you've not been to the Near East Side, go see some of the stuff that they are doing.
Come for tamale if you don't come for anything else. Come for the tamales, yeah. Yes.
We're almost, we're over time, but one more question, maybe Owen, you were gonna ask something. Thinking about, we, again, kind of directing it toward class and things we've talked about.
Yeah.
We've read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, we've read Saul Alinsky, we've talked a lot about how part of the process working with the community is kind of encouraging folks to become like more politically
Yeah.
conscious,
Uh-huh.
Political subjects. And is that something that you all have engaged in? Is that something that's kind of in your kind of sphere of important things to be working towards with the community? Thinking about, the reality is that the city is full of power dynamics.
Yep.
And if you're not engaged there,
Yep.
you're going to get pushed to the back.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely people where, that's their thing and that's what they want to work on, that's what they want to focus on. And I think thinking a little bit about the asset-based community development lens, we always want to look at, what are the assets in our neighborhood and our community that can be used, beneficially for the good of your neighbor and the good of your community. And so some of that is organizing around political things. And I think starting with building that community is incredibly important, and building trust among one another. And then being able to more so show the importance of that to the city. And I think the reputation of Englewood is such that we are invested in the city, and we are invested in the good of our neighbors, no matter what their background. And so that has kind of driven some of the conversations about investing in affordable housing, about providing adequate social services for our neighbors and things like that. So I wouldn't say it's the thing we're most focused on, but certainly understand the importance of that and how those dynamics work, usually to the detriment of our neighbors.
Are you grant writing and applying for tax credits in-house?
Yeah, we have some different partnerships. So a lot of times for tax credits, we are either working with a co-developer and have worked with a couple of the same ones for a little while. And for the most part, they do take the brunt of the rental housing tax credit application. So we'll work with a co-developer. I think there's been maybe 1 or 2 where we've done it on our own. Most of the state grants or the city grants or things like that we're writing in-house. We've gotten a federal, the job creation grant that I mentioned a few times, and that one is so very particular that we have a grant writer who does that. But myself and my boss are the primary grant writers. We don't have a specific grant writer, and the summer season was a lot of grants. But yeah, so it depends on maybe the specific nature of the grant, but a lot of it is in-house, yeah. Yes.
Kind of going back to the community engagement part of it, I was gonna ask, like, how do you guys handle the conflict of interest within a community, like the
Ooh, yeah.
organizations?
Uh-huh.
They both want different things.
Yeah, yeah. Trying to think of like a specific instance. I would say a line that we have talked about a lot is the common good, and so like trying to think through as a larger group of people, whether it's our organization or the folks around us or like the larger Near East Side, like thinking through what is most beneficial for the largest amount of people. Yeah, that's the short answer, I guess. Thinking through, what could be the best common good for the most number of people. Yeah.
Thank you,
Good.
Abigail.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. There's one thing that kind of stood out to me. Abigail went through a lot of information.
Yeah.
Talked about the history, the context, so many of the things that they've been working on. There was a lot of amazing stuff on those slides. There were a lot of amazing initiatives, projects, millions of dollars change, which kind of reflected those things. And, as I understood it, Englewood started as a small group of people that were working out of a church, and it's grown into this thing that's affecting a whole portion of the city of Indianapolis. It makes me think of like businesses like Walmart that starts as a mom and pop store, and over decades of hard work and diligence, and they become this conglomerate. Muncie, we have some CDCs, and they do great work. But there are still, big niches that need to be filled. Land bank is one of those things. We're very small. We're trying to fill a niche. But these kinds of things are not just Indianapolis. These kinds of things could happen in Muncie.
Yep.
It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of thought and reflection and action. It requires financing. It requires really smart, data-driven decision making. But anyways, just for me, when I get to listen to folks like Abigail talk about what they're doing there, it makes me think of what's possible, even in a place like Muncie. And we're a lot of people are engaged in this, and we're moving forward. But it's encouraging, so I appreciate you coming, and we get to go see it on Monday. Those students. Yeah. Thank you.